Welcome to the Chronically Will Podcast, where we have real conversations with community that need to be heard. On this episode, you will hear from Brittany. Brittany was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 4 months after her 20th birthday. Brittany will talk about motherhood with diabetes and mothering and nurturing even her younger siblings. At 20 years young, her pediatrician gave her a type 2 diagnosis. After that original type 2 diagnosis, she did everything as far as health, wellness, and diet to render this new diagnosis. None of this changed her insulin need. When she went to an endocrinologist and they finally did the blood test and told her directly, no matter what you do, you'll need insulin. You're a type 1 diabetic. This diagnosis was and continues to be a significant mental burden on her own life, like many of us all living with chronic health conditions. In this episode, Brittany and I speak a ton about generational health, including traumas and stigmas. We all need a community to be able to express our truths unprovoked while intentionally and unapologetically being ourselves. Because as she said, being diagnosed with diabetes due to the information that was lacking, it was a death sentence. Brittany, you are a pure gem. The jewels you share about being diagnosed as a young adult, childbearing with diabetes, going into DKA without an understanding of what it meant, are all information that needs to be shared. Thank you.
As you said, my name is Brittany, last name Bediako. Yes, it is Ghanaian. I'm 33 in 6 days, actually. And I've been type 1 since 2011. So I'll be coming up on 13 years in July. And I am a mother, daughter, wife, friend. In professional space, I'm a leader, connector of people. Type 1 is something that I used to keep in my back pocket and not necessarily wear out in the world, but I definitely have become more empowered in recent years, getting out of denial, especially going through that whole phase. I think many of us do. So, like I said, I'm just happy to be here and connect with you today.
Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate you. So as I embark on this journey, I need my people also. That's the only way we rise and take over this place together.
I'm born and raised in Cleveland.
My first memory of Cleveland is when I was a kid, Bone Thugs and Harmony.
Yeah, that's what people, every time they hear Cleveland, they're like either LeBron James, well, not anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah. For sure.
Yep. For the love of money. How was it for you growing up in Cleveland?
So it depends. I will say, even when you're young, like you don't really understand what inner city is until you get out of it, right? So I will say I was somewhat inner city. Like I definitely went to inner city schools, but they referred to where I was like ghetto suburbia. So like right on the cusp of all the things happening. You cross the street, you could be like, oh, you need to, not be here when it's dark, or into like more where the white folks were. And then also it was interesting because when we moved into that particular space, like my parents still own the house. I've owned it for 20 plus years. So the piece of that, and I love that. I'm actually the oldest of 5. My mom has 5 children. And my dad actually has 6 or 5 of brothers.
So you've been raising children.
Yeah, so that's why I said I have 1 biologically. If you talk to my sister, she is 12 years younger than me. If you talk to her, she will very much let you know I was like a second mom to her. Even as far as like getting her to college and trying to get her set up and things, like I'm very much involved in her life, and I have been. So yeah, it's and my mom did like daycare and childcare and foster care and all the cares. So I've been around kids literally my entire life.
You always had a job.
For sure.
You never went jobless.
So now when my son tries because he even does some of that now, like he'll give me a look. I say, you better fix your face.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also like with being like an only child, he's been around adults more, and like his vocabulary is insane, and just the way he like comprehends things, like he's very much like more mature. So
That's
he'll like
amazing.
he's super comfortable talking to adults and different things like that. Like he can fit in with the kids and play and stuff, but
His
he'll hold his
preference.
own in a conversation. Yeah, he will. And he'll get right with you.
If you ever cross in the Delaware, knock on my door because my 10-year-old is that's him.
Wow.
He tells everyone he knows 9 languages. He can speak a little bit in all of them, and he's taught himself. But
Oh, I
yeah,
love that. I used
but
to speak 5
you
semi-fluent.
say you used to speak 5 languages,
Something like that. Yeah.
something like that.
I used to refer myself as a linguist by trade. So I actually like did learn more of like the Spanish, the
Mhm.
Latin. At one point I was tapping into Portuguese and different things like American Sign Language. Like I absolutely love languages.
These
So
are all things you took upon yourself to learn.
mhm,
Okay,
yeah, my
you're
bachelor's degree is actually in linguistics. So
okay.
yeah.
Linguistics. What do you actually do with that?
First of all, the way I even ended up getting that degree was completely by happenstance. Like I was in school for actuarial science,
Mhm.
which is like heavily math and statistics based. And that was after declaring a major in like pre-law because I thought I wanted to argue with everybody and their mom. But I quickly found out that was not what I wanted, and I wanted to do something that made money. So I was in school for math. And by the time I got to the end of my 4th year and I was supposed to be graduating, I met with one of my guidance counselors, and she's like, listen, we appreciate that you love to learn, but your scholarship money is running out. Your time is running out. You need to go ahead and get out of here. And she looked at my transcript and she's like, you have enough language credits to graduate with a bachelor's in linguistics. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do with that? And she was like, you need to get up out of here. So I did not go to school for that. It was truly just, I was just taking all kind of language courses and I loved it. It was just something that I enjoyed doing. So I ended up getting my degree in that, but how I ended up using it is I actually by trade am an IO psychologist slash HR leader. And I use it as a communication base because one of the reasons why I took all of those language classes is because I did not enjoy having barriers to the way I communicated with people. It didn't matter what language they spoke, I wanted to be able to connect with them and vice versa. So sometimes you have to meet people where they are. So I ended up taking that in itself and shifting it more to like a business communications and just communications in general. And I use that very heavily in my profession now. So,
Okay. Yeah. That's serious. When I jotted down a few notes. First thing I heard you, one of the first things I heard you mention were that was that you basically got kicked out of school for a good thing. And I was like, wow, you probably would have continued until you were a professor, dean, and
probably,
they would have offered you a job.
probably.
Yeah, you would have been teaching the courses that you took previously. How many? Well, I'm not even going to ask how many years you were there.
So I was there like altogether 4.5 years. Like I said, at the end of that 4th, they definitely was like, you got to go. So I ended up having my bachelor's in linguistics and my minor in statistics. So I was able to utilize that. And then honestly, I took a break from school. It was one of those things like you did it because it's like that's what you knew. Like I was one of those kids in high school. Like I went to early college high school. So we took college level courses in high school during the summer. So I literally didn't even really have a summer break. Like I went to school all year for 3 years and then graduated early.
Did you
Um,
enjoy it? Like, did you
I
truly love
enjoyed the
it?
social aspects of
Okay.
it, and I'm naturally like a very ambitious person. So they were telling me I was going to get done with high school a whole year early, and then when I graduated, I was already a sophomore in college. Like, heck yeah,
Mhm.
let's kill 2 birds with 1 stone. But it was a lot of work and I ended up burning myself out. So I had to take a break.
With your degree in
Mhm.
linguistics, has that
Mhm.
helped you in different, like working or being invited into other cultures?
Mhm. I would say I don't know that I was necessarily invited, but I will say that I did not feel alienated. Like I'm very much immersed in whatever I'm doing. So I'm able to be culturally sensitive to different things. And also, like, I do love to learn. So I'm not going to go into anything blind if I can help it. And it's not just the language, it's also about truly the culture and cultural norms and different
Mhm.
things like that. Like looking people in their eyes could be disrespectful depending upon where you're going. So those are all things that I take into consideration. So I think just my underlying respect for people in general has been really helpful and just being more welcomed into those spaces and or accepted.
Yeah, I was asking that because I have many friends. So a part of my background is I was a media literacy educator for almost 10 years. I
Mhm.
have a background in trauma therapy as well as masters in public health. And like like you, I keep on adding on. And I ask that because like my friends that are ESL teachers, they
Mhm.
I often speak to them about how they're like they have to tap into the community and cultures because
Yeah.
um they tend to not see a lot of teachers doing that. They just go by the blueprint
Right.
instead of individually recognizing each family as a whole and no
Mhm.
compare contrast one family to the other. And
Yeah.
as people living with chronic health conditions as we do, that kind of resonates truly with us and our own health care, how we should be seen as individuals and not being drawn out as a statistic as compared to the things that have occurred over the last, I'm even going to say the last 100 plus years
Mhm.
and dating back to even when like big mega organizations in the diabetes space, research space came about in the 1970s when people of
Mhm.
color weren't even invited into that space.
Mhm.
So statistically, you won't even find us in in any of that old data or information.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of the things that you are involved in or that you do. Um, what are your true passions?
Hmm. I would have to say my true passions are helping people live a life that is fulfilled and happy. And I say that because it doesn't really matter the realm that I'm doing it in, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally. I think at the root, like it makes me feel good to see other people living their life in a way that is authentic to them, that is real, that makes them feel good and just gives them that staying power to keep going every day.
Yeah. As a true empath at heart, people do find it hard to believe when we say things like we truly um not only want to better the lives of everyone else, but we truly just want everyone to be their best and that we can give up or not give up, but stop a lot of the things that we're doing along our journey while taking a pause or break to assist other people to get on the same journey as we're on. when I tell people things of that nature, like being an empath and trying to embody the things that others are going through so that I won't only be showing sympathy, but empathy. Many people truly don't understand that. And I see that you truly like that's you. As someone told me about 6 months ago, they said, Will, you're an anomaly. And I said, huh? They said, you're a black male in this space, and you're doing everything that you can to help others and reach others. But I let them know that it's not just me. This is what we do as a people. If you've ever been through any like pain, trauma, and that doesn't even have to be your own. It could be pain and trauma from your family, from your background, ancestors. We also live for them. We live for our ancestors to make tomorrow a better place for us because that's what they would want.
Yes, I feel that on a very spiritual level. That's one of the things I'm a note taker as well. And that's one of the things I wrote down as we were talking about community and even talking about healthcare. And you mentioned like you are involved in like trauma work and different things like that. I will say that's probably one of the most transformative journeys I've been on to date. Is diving deeper into my own personal trauma and also the ancestral trauma and societal trauma and all the things. Because there's a book called The Body Keeps Score and how that pain and trauma manifests into what we show up as today. And part of that is the autoimmune disease, the chronic disease. So it's just, I found it so intriguing and interesting how literally it's all connected. And by uncovering some of the things that are more taboo and we really don't want to talk about because maybe it's painful or, different things like that, like it is helpful to go back to that point and start healing some of those things in order to be able to show up better today. So I absolutely love that you do some of that work for sure.
Right. Could you restate the title of that book?
I believe it's called The Body Keeps Score.
Okay. And I think I'm familiar with that. The Body Keeps Score is like based on like what they would say like your ACEs score. That's like adverse trauma and how it affects you through the entirety of your life. So if you have a certain score, basically they question and wonder, how are you able to do the things that you're able to do? When that actual score is, it's a number, but it doesn't perpetuate who you are as an individual.
Yeah.
Because as an individual, we as a people, like we may not have seen the struggles of our grandparents, great grandparents, all of those things, but genetically it's embedded in us.
For sure.
So we feel it in the earth. Every way and walk of life, it's in us. So we have to do what we can do to uproot that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I truly love communicating and speaking with people that I feel as well. Everyone I think I talk to, somewhere along the line, I have an inkling that we're connected on a more spiritual journey, and that does keep the conversation so much more organic and natural, as opposed to, like I said at the start of it, how many conversations that you see or you hear just seem as though they're scripted. Where does that come from you?
I'm trying to get into it. So
that's what I do best.
Yeah. So I will say my parents do have more of a religious background for sure. Like my father is a deacon. I grew up in the church for sure, Christian apostolic faith. But there was still a turning point for me that I won't say transcended everything I knew, but I just got to a point where I said, you know what I'm doing right now isn't working. I see my environment. I see how I'm showing up in that environment. Like I was having really bad anxiety attacks, to the point where it was like crippling. I couldn't drive. Sometimes I couldn't move. Um, and I was like, you know what? This is not it. Like there has to be more to life than this. So that's when I actually started my journey. And that was 10 plus years ago now. Started going to therapy, started trying to uncover like what the heck is wrong and how can I fix it. I'm definitely one of those people. I'm more inclined to like, if you let me know what a problem is, like I'll do everything I can to help you overcome that problem, whatever it is. Sometimes folks aren't necessarily in a place where they want to hear the truth of the solution and different things, or they're not truly committed to doing what needs to be done to overcome that particular situation. But I was at a point where I'm like, I don't care, like whatever it is, I need better than this. Um, and you know, as we're going through life and things like that, like some of the things we're just not adequately prepared for. We don't have the blueprint. We don't have good examples in our environment to see like, oh, okay, this is what a successful relationship looks like. This is what, you know. So when we embark on those things on our own, it's like, oh crap, what am I supposed to do? It's,
Right.
you know, so those kind of things, and transitioning more into like the adult world after I graduated college and different things like that. Like I had severe anxiety. I felt like I was failing at everything I did. And it was really intense. So even with a more traditional like religious background and different things like that, I'm like, there has to be more.
More.
So yeah, that's when I really started diving a lot deeper, and it's one of the best things I've done.
Mhm. Um, as we're young and children growing up, it's almost as though like we don't even know this, but our parents have a plan for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're truly embarking on their journey,
Mm-hmm.
on their mission in life. Like they have an end goal for us and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as we grow and we mature, some of those things, like those questions that we had residing within only our own brain, our own mind, as we see the world and different cultures and different ethnicities, we realize that a lot of the things that we were, we didn't even, I mean, I wouldn't say we learned a lot of the things that were cemented in us
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't even question them at all growing up. So now as we're more maturing, we're able to see different ways of life. And now we know that there's more to it than just what was given. And that's a hard process for our adults. That's a hard process for us.
Yeah.
And I know personally growing up, like I questioned everything. Um, and I didn't have any fears growing up at all. Um, I always tell people my dad's 6 foot, 300 pounds. If I didn't fear him, then what else could I fear? And like everyone laughs at that. They're like, I get it. Um, but yeah, that helped me be able to tap into other, like I said, other cultures, other religions, just other styles of life and living. It helped me diversify my mental portfolio more
Yes.
so than even my physical portfolio. Because mentally now I'm able to understand why I have questions of my own. Like, why am I feeling this way when certain things are occurring in the world that aren't directly affecting me? But then in hindsight, as I grew older, I realized these things are directly affecting me. They are, because there's a root to everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, growing up, how was it with your parents, with your family, as they seen you invoke on this journey?
So, excuse me. I feel like being the oldest, like I definitely felt more of like the guinea pig of the family. Like my parents were young when they had me like 21 and 24, I believe. Um, so a lot of things that happened, it was like, okay, well, we're just gonna we're gonna push for what we want, but wherever we land, like it's okay. And as I got older and, I was one of those kids, like, she's going to be all right. Like, she's smart, she's ambitious, like, she's going to land on her feet, whatever she does. Which also consequently led to me not really getting some of the support that I needed or desired because everybody thought that I would just, I had it. I didn't need that extra. So as I started getting older and going through like these real life changes, I don't know that I had the community or the support within my family to be able to like authentically talk about some things that I needed to kind of process through. So like even when I was diagnosed, like my parents didn't know what to do with that. They were like, and mind you, I was like 20 years old. So I was very much an adult, but it was like, well, we want to support you, but we don't really know how. And unless you tell us, we won't know how. Whereas I'm the type of person, like, I'm immediately like, Google's one of my best friends. Let me figure out what I can learn so that way I can best support you. Like, that's how I choose to show up for folks. So it was interesting, just like transitioning and they just kind of watched and they were as supportive as they knew how to be. But as far as like having like strong opinions one way or another, like they just kind of was like, she's going to be fine type attitude. So.
Yeah. More so, because you were now an adult, or was it because they also saw your maturity as you were growing? That I know when your children don't ask you all the questions, you may tend to think that, okay, they're fine. But I always tell people that at no point in time in my life have I been fine. Like, fine. The more questions asked, the better,
Yeah.
And,
I don't know if it was necessarily about like asking questions. I think I had to grow up very young. So given 8, 9, 10 years old, that's when I started like watching and caring for children. That's when I started like taking care of the house and had chores and different things that my siblings did not have.
And you have an 8-year-old today. You could not picture him doing any of those things, could you?
Oh, he does not.
Exactly.
He does not. That was also one of the reasons why when I said like I was freaking out.
That's a traumatic experience. That's traumatic experience, having to do all that.
And I didn't know that then. Right. I didn't know that then. And to be completely honest, it's not even something I can really talk about it to my parents now because they're like, well, that's how, it's a completely different generation.
Right. Like I had to do this when I was growing up and blah. Yeah.
I had to do more. So you didn't even have it as bad as I had it. And it's like, it's invalidating.
Bad is bad.
It's invalidating. So, a lot of what I've had to do is regarding self because I like I said, I could not have those conversations and that's fine. I went through a very major period of longing for the parents I wish I had. And like, that sounds horrible, but it's not a knock to my parents. It's more so, like I said, the heart support and the spirit support that wasn't just, oh, I'm gonna pray for you. We're gonna pray it away. Or, like there were different things that I wish I knew why and that might have been helpful or just some additional. But I was very nervous and I knew that how I grew up, I did not want my son to grow up, but I also knew that this is all that I knew. And that was part of that. Like, there has to be more out here. Like, I need to be equipped with more information to be able to make better decisions for my own offspring. And I'm very intentional about that. Like my son, he has different levels of responsibility, like for his own self. But as far as like caring for a house or even things like with our animals, like I don't go walk the dog. Like, no, if I'm walking the dog, you can join me because it's not your responsibility. Because I didn't have that. And, it's just one of those things that was in my card deck, but he just gets to live his life in a way that I wish I could have. So
Your son being 8 years old, we can't compare. As I tell my parents this all the time. It's something that my parents are in their mid to late 60s. It's
okay.
I think just it's instilled in them to a magnitude to where today there is no turning back the clock. And when I was growing up and stuff, it hurt. It truly did hurt. Hearing those things from my parents, like even like certain words they would say, like hearing them like call people like stupid or dumb, things of that nature. I always question my parents on that. Like, why would you say that about someone, about a peer or even a child? Like, people need different resources to be at their best. When we talk about like equity and things of that nature, at 8 years old, there's no way that I could tell my children to do certain tasks with me being the person that is that the person that they should primarily, me and mom being the people that they should primarily be looking at as the guide to being the adults that they need to be. So I can't remove myself as the adult and insert a child to take on the blunt of responsibilities. Like I remember at 8 years old, helping like my older brother lift washing machines out of the basement. And I remember one time actually by myself taking one down the basement at probably 9, 10 years old. And when I mentioned this to my 15-year-old a couple years ago, he said, "What? Like, how?" And I'm looking at my 10-year-old today, and like me, like when we look at our kids, we look at them like they're small, like tiny, even though we were that same size at 8 and 10 years old. But I'm like, there is no way he could pull that down a basement without crushing himself. And just things like us having to do things like that, take on the responsibility of watching siblings, other people's children. It did not make me a stronger person, as some people will say. It did not make me, especially mentally. It was like, to me, some of the things that I was forced to do was debilitating, crushing. But at the same time, I recently recorded an episode with my dad because he's also living with chronic health conditions. And he spoke so much about like how his parents did everything. And I know that he grew up in an era where him and his siblings were needed to do certain things because a lot of times they were faced with life or death during, Jim Crow, civil rights, like those eras. So a lot of the times his father wasn't home because he was working nonstop. So I truly understand that was something that they had to do. But as I told him, I think there is a whole generation missed where you as a young person growing up and becoming an adult where y'all weren't gifted the opportunity to learn in like modern things that we know today, like adverse trauma and the effects of that, that it's okay to just be yourself and just to ask the questions, tell the things that you need to tell so that people will know that it wasn't okay for me or any like people to be left home alone and things like that. Because even though as kids we may have been like, oh, we're okay, we still had fears. Everyone has those.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So to move forward, I do want to get the conversation going to a few of the notes that I do have jotted down. You and me, Brittany, we have something in common, many things in common, as we have brought them to the attention throughout this podcast. But you were diagnosed at 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Brittany, I too was diagnosed at 20 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I think this is maybe the third episode I've done with someone who was diagnosed at 20 years old. And we speak about how we had this trajectory, right? We knew exactly where our life was headed. Whether it was me traveling, being a recording artist, things of that nature. I was producing music, engineering, recording music. And at 20 years old and 2 months, I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. A lot of the things that I was doing at that time got altered. And today, knowing where I'm at in life, I know that I'm on a journey that I'm supposed to be on. But at that moment and the years that followed that, I question often, why did this happen to me at this time in my life? What am I supposed to do now? I didn't even know about health and well-being. I was just a young adult, growing into my own being. And then it felt like I was made to take care of another young adult. It was like everything that I learned about life was altered. How was it for you being diagnosed at 20 years old?
Ooh, so I will say at the time, I didn't understand. It was definitely like a why me type energy. But like looking back on it now, like I know exactly what led to those things. Just, kind of looking at it more objectively. But like I said before, when I was diagnosed, you said 20 and 2 months, March, April, May, June, July. So for me, it was 20 and 4 months. And it was a situation where I was going to church and I was involved in the Anointed Hands ministry, so doing sign language. And the director of the program, she like saw me excessively drinking, and she's like saw me going to the restroom and things. And she's like, "Have you been to the doctor?" And I was like, "No, what for?" And she said, one of her children, her sons are type 1, and she was like, "You should probably go, because it looks like this. And had she not known the signs, I probably would have ended up in DKA somewhere, to be completely honest." So I truly am so grateful for her. And I ended up going, and mind you, I also didn't know anything about healthcare, well-being, anything like that. And I went to a pediatrician at 20 years old, and they were like, "Yeah, your sugar is like 500-600. We're gonna do this, and you need to change your lifestyle, you need to lose weight and all this other stuff." And they told me I was type 2. So I said, okay, fine. It was kind of punch in the gut, but I was like, okay, it's okay. Like,
And there was
whatever.
no need in you or reason for you to question them, because that white coat gave you the diagnosis, right?
Correct. So, and I knew very limited about my family's medical history and different things that they struggle with. So I knew diabetes ran in the family. So I'm like, okay. And then, like I said, objectively looking at it, like I was a struggling college student. I worked 3-4 jobs just to be able to pay for my rent and my car. I ate horribly. I was eating cheap, carby food, just to be able to get by. So I really know that just the stress of that overloaded my system to the point where it was like, my pancreas was like, no, ma'am. So I didn't question it. I did what they told me. I completely changed my eating habits. I lost like 50 pounds and I was still more and more needing to take insulin. I'm like, wait, something not adding up. The math ain't mathing. Like, y'all told me if I do the things, then I would be here. Why is that not happening? So then I end up going to an actual endocrinologist who ran the blood test. And she was like, oh, yeah, it doesn't matter how much weight you lose. You're going to be diabetic because you're type 1. And that was like, really?
So how far after that initial diagnosis?
2 years.
2 years. So 2 years you were treated as a type 2 diabetic.
Yeah.
And as we say, there's no better than or worse than when it comes to life and chronic health conditions. But at the same time, if you were given the education, information to be at your best, those 2 years may have been a lot more simplified, a lot more easier.
Yeah, and I won't say that they were difficult because I was still in that transition period where my body was still accepting some of the insulin that I was making.
Okay.
So it was really okay. Like, it wasn't horrible. Like, I'm one of those people, like, I'm gonna overcome this. You can tell me whatever you want, but that doesn't define me. And like, if you say I can get over this, then I'm gonna get over it. Excuse me. So just kind of getting that news 2 years later that it didn't matter what I did, like, this is something I had to live with. Like, that was hard to accept. Probably harder than the first time that they told me anything, because I'm, type 2, you can change your diet and do different things and not have to take as much insulin, if any at all. And they had me on metformin, and that was making me sick. Like, literally every single day I was like throwing up, and just, it was not good. So like, my body was just not having it. So yeah, I won't say that those 2 years were necessarily hard. I think I worked very hard. Like I said, I lost so much weight and different things. Like, I was really proud of myself for that, but just being confirmed, like, no matter what you do, like, this is something you have to live with. It's not something that you chose. It's not something that you asked for. It's not something you even knew was a potential to happen, because there's no one else in my family who has type 1. I'm the only one. So that in itself was like, kind of like a WTF moment. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? So that is when kind of like the mental health and different things took a different turn, because I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it was really hard to accept.
Now, did you have the typical signs upon diagnosis? Like, and also, how long do you think that you were actually living with it leading up to that first diagnosis?
I would say at least probably like 4 to 6 months after I knew like what the actual signs were, and like different ways I would feel like after I ate. Like, like I said, I was eating horrible. I was eating cheap carby food. So after I would eat like a lot of carbs, like, I would just have this and ultimately I was high, like my sugar was high, but I didn't know that. And I started feeling those types of sensations probably within the last 4 to 6 months before being diagnosed.
Yeah.
And like I said, I didn't know the signs. So
right, you're probably going through a honeymoon phase at that time. So, and that honeymoon phase may have even extended 2 years to where your body was still producing some sort of insulin. So you did not, you weren't rushed into DKA and emergency. So, when you were actually, did you take yourself to the hospital based off of what the lady at church had mentioned to you, the signs?
Yes, I took myself to the doctor's office, and they sent me to the emergency room because I had to get some fluids, and I was very much dehydrated.
Did you suffer from the exhaustion, the frequent urination? You did mention the thirst, and I guess that coincided with the frequent urination.
Yeah. I didn't start suffering from the exhaustion for some years. But definitely like excessive thirst and frequent urination. Like I said, this is just kind of that like internal I'm high feeling. It's hard to describe.
It is.
Your body is kind of like that ugh, type feeling.
Right.
Um,
Were you
yeah.
afraid of at all when you were diagnosed and knowing the media perception on diabetes, how it was directly connected to health, um, and wellness and things like that, how the media has always perpetuated it as someone who eats too much, someone who's unhealthy, someone who just doesn't care, those types of things.
Yeah. I will say I didn't I've never been one to know too much of what was going on in the media. Like I've always kind of lived in my own little bubble. Um, so like the most I would know was like commercials that I would see for like diabetes medication and just kind of the general societal understanding. Like if you had diabetes, it's because you ate poorly. Um, which again, at the time I was eating poorly, but I completely changed that around and I was eating literally like chicken and salads, like baked chicken and salads, and limiting my carbs very heavily. So I know that probably contributed to my honeymoon phase lasting a little bit longer than it may have if I would have kept eating like really badly. But also, like I said, I checked my sugar like very diligently. Like I was praying my
Diligently.
finger all the freaking time. Yeah. So, um, noticing like even when I wasn't doing the things and eating poorly and all of that, noticing that I still had to take more insulin, like that's what kind of led me to be like, something ain't right. And then researching more and then seeing like what actually was going on in the media and different things like that. And also just getting to a point of general consensus, like a lot of people don't know, like outside of the diabetes community, they don't know there's a difference between type 1, type 2, type 1.5, type NADA, whatever the heck, like there's so many different types now. But a lot of people don't know that it's just overarching diabetes. So, especially for the fact, like, I've never been like pencil thin, like, I've always been on the thicker side, even as a kid. So, it was definitely like, oh, it's a weight thing. And it's like, actually, it's not.
Right.
Like, I can literally show you pictures of people who are all of 90 pounds and
Right.
like,
I
or even children and
I
things like,
remember
people
growing up.
don't know.
I remember growing up hearing my cousins like make jokes with like their baby sister talking about, "Oh, you're going to have diabetes when you get older because you're overweight and whatnot."
Yeah.
I'm great. It's great that we have a space like this where we can get rid of those stigmas,
Yeah.
and hopefully desensitize what it is and the meaning that is backed behind um, a chronic health condition such as diabetes, letting people know that diabetes is not what the media tells you it is. Just like
Yeah.
any other chronic health condition, it's an individual based condition. And at the same time, we did not choose this. Even people that are diagnosed with other forms of diabetes based on their health and wellness, they did not choose that. So
Yeah.
it's best if we as a people just see it with a clear mind and clear view that the people who are or the people who do have these conditions do want to be their best.
Absolutely.
No one wants to feel bad all the time or take the prescribed medications and therapies and all of those things. And as you mentioned in the beginning, the math that be mathing.
Hmm.
So as far as your type 1 diagnosis, when you were given that diagnosis, were you initially, did you even like understand that now I'm not what I was previously? You did. Did they give you the information that was needed? Google,
No,
Dr.
she
Google.
basically, And they did like refer me to a nutritionalist. But I mean, even still, I was eating phenomenally at the time. So nutrition wasn't necessarily an issue. She basically just told me that I would be on insulin for the rest of my life, and I didn't have a choice in the matter. Like I said, which was pretty hard to swallow. So after that point, I did not move to looking for support. Like I said, I didn't have it at home. I didn't have it amongst my friends or extended family or anything like that. I kind of just went into this place of denial. Like, who are you to tell me what I'm going to have forever? Like, absolutely not. And I actually, for a time, stopped taking my insulin altogether. And I was like, I'm just going to eat better and I'm just going to figure it out. And that ultimately led to me going into DK, which was probably the second wake up call.
Yeah, a lot of people who are non-diabetic, they don't realize when you tell them you have to take insulin to live.
Mm-hmm.
It's near impossible to get through to some people that because I only eat vegetables or only drink water and nothing else, that I still have to take insulin. They're like, we've all received a message from someone sharing juice and berry routine that will get rid of our need for insulin.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had someone very close to me last week actually send me something about some plant, and they were like, they just sent it to me. It was a video, like something on TikTok or whatnot, about a guy cutting some kind of like cactus fruit and saying it gets rid of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And I didn't even respond to him. I just put a thumbs down emoji. Like, it was like, when I see you in person, we'll have that conversation.
Yeah.
Because we know, like, especially throughout the last 4 years, throughout like the pandemic and all, how the media impact and influence has been on people. Dr. Google, WebMD don't have nothing on social media lights. Like, serious. It has truly not benefited people as far as like longevity and health, because so many things that were easily able to be remedied, people aren't even taking those steps today. For a while, did you feel like you were the only one?
Absolutely. For sure. For sure. And I think that's one of the hardest things, like, for folks to accept, is that at the end of the day, like, I don't think anyone had ill intent. They were just doing the best with what they had. And like I said, just the fact that I went to a pediatrician at 20 years old, like, there's no way. I should have had a primary care doctor. Like, it's a lot of things that should have happened by that time. I just wasn't informed. And my parents are from the generation that just blindly trusted doctors. Like, whatever they said, they took that as law because they were seen as the experts. But now you're seeing folks actually like turning to get second opinions and doing their own research and figuring out, what is this medication that these people are prescribing me? What could it do to me? Because they're not disclosing it. And then this whole big pharma debate, and it's so much that goes into it. But for me, like, I definitely felt like I was the only one. There was no community. There was no one else I knew. I had met one other type 1 diabetic in person, and that was actually someone I started dating, that I just, on a whim, we were talking, and I was like, I do want to let you know this. And he's like, oh my God. And he was Black. So I'm like, are you real?
Right.
I truly had never. And even when I went to the like JDRF events and things like that, just trying to be of community. It wasn't what I wanted or what I needed. It was just a lot of like info dumping and people who went to like diabetes camp together and stuff like that. And I'm like, I missed all of that. Like I didn't have those experiences. So trying to navigate it as a young adult. And then also, the next year became legal to drink, right? So you're understanding the effects of alcohol and you're seeing folks who are not well, I don't try to say anyone is a good or bad diabetic, but I knew people who would get drunk and then, rip their pump out and go crazy and start doing weird things. So it's like, I didn't have the best examples
Right.
of what I was supposed to do, So it was just, I didn't have a lot, and what I did have, it wasn't fruitful in a way that would be helpful to me. So it was a journey.
Did it how much did diabetes affect you from those years 20 to 22 while you were still in school on your own, socially? How did that affect you socially, emotionally, and even physically, like with your education and being able to consume?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I don't feel like I really started getting some of the effects of like the exhaustion and then the foggy brain and stuff like that. I didn't start getting some of that until much, much later. But it was in those years that I really started to understand like how much people don't know. And just like I would be in a situation where, and don't get me wrong, when I finally started seeing this endocrinologist, she was like making me OD on insulin. She was telling me to take like 30 units for like a bag of chips and something like that. Like she had me taking way too much. And it was just up and down, up and down, up and down. And that part got exhausting and it was definitely an overload on my body. But I would say like, oh my God, I think my sugar is low. And I'm like, oh, take some insulin. It's like, that is not what's supposed to happen. So
there's so many things that are misunderstood about us and living with diabetes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it more spoke to the people, and I took this as a form of who truly cared to learn. It's like, if you want to be in my vicinity and do things with me and be out with me and me feel comfortable enough to have you as like that support, like I need you to learn a little bit. I need you to understand, like, if you see this or if this happens, this is what you do. Not just kind of blindly going into, oh, my grandma had it and, she died. And it's like, that's not what you say. That's not what we
Now with people saying things like that, did it like alter or change some of like your relationships or even friendships?
Oh, for sure. I had always been very kind of picky about who I had in my close circle anyway, but it really just like solidified, like, okay, remind me not to do this around you, or that kind of thing. And it already from like a mental and emotional standpoint, like being diagnosed with type 1 was kind of like a death sentence. Like, not only did you not know people around you who had it, or even your age bracket who had it, but anyone you did know who had diabetes was older and missing a foot and or not alive anymore. So it's like, and once upon a time, like we weren't as medically developed and we didn't have the second pancreases and all these other things. So like your amount of years that you're expected to live, your life expectancy wasn't that long.
Right.
So all of those things kind of weighing together on top of the fact, like these are people who don't have these ailments, don't have this chronic disease that they have to deal with. So like and it did lead to some envy. I'm like, oh, well, you can go live your life. You don't have to travel with syringes and different things. And you don't have to worry about that. Like you can eat whatever you want. You can have, back when IHOP had unlimited buffet pancakes, and you can just, you can do all the things and
I went I went when they had them with diabetes. Diabetes wasn't going to hold me back. What is it? Rudy Tooty something? Fresh and fruity. I don't know. I remember those pancakes.
I love that. That is
I remember
hilarious.
actually going on a break during like a lunch break with two coworkers. One of them was a cousin I worked with. And we actually went there and did the all you can eat pancakes and went back to work. Like I was
Wow.
young. I didn't even think about I probably was maybe like 24 or 25 at the time, but I didn't even think about it. Like I took some insulin. I'm good. Insulin was like a band-aid at one point in my life.
Mm,
Like I never felt, I mean, early on I did not feel as though it was a need to
yeah.
live. Like no one ever gave me that education. Like I remember like when you talk about stories of DKA, I remember for maybe 2 days being laid out on a ex-girlfriend's floor, throwing up, thinking that I had food poisoning from Chinese food that I had previously. And my blood sugar reading just high. I didn't know I was supposed to contact the medical personnel and tell them that I was in DKA. I didn't even know what DKA was at the point.
Yeah.
Like most people don't truly, unless you were diagnosed with when you were a kid, where your parents were given that information and then they transferred it to you as
Yeah.
adults. When most people go through that first episode of DKA or severe hypoglycemia, we are unaware that that can occur.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
you said you were DKA helped change who you are. How was
Mhm.
that?
So I actually, I was my now husband. We weren't even engaged yet. We had just started kind of dating again, and I had lost like so much weight. Like I was so thin. I'm like, I'm on here looking nice. Like,
And they don't tell
mind you,
us that.
it was a whole symptom. I had no idea. I'm just like, but what started to worry him was I was always exhausted. Like I would sleep days away. And he's like, this is not you. Like something is wrong. And I'm like, no, it's just fine. I'm just tired. Like maybe I just need to take some more vitamins. Like I was brushing it off because after all of that, like I didn't want to go to the doctor. Every time I went, like it was just bad news. And I was like, I'm good. Like I'll figure it out. Um, so I ended up going and they did some blood work. And all of a sudden, I just ended up getting whisked away to like being admitted. And they were like, you can't leave, you can't eat, like had me hooked up to all this stuff. And I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, yeah, that you have like your acid levels in your blood are way too high. Like you're at risk for your organs shutting down, like real life. And I was like, wait, what? So I
Like
was like, how did we get here?
I didn't even know this was an option, right? Like
How
just
did we get here?
yeah.
Like, what happened? And they're like, you haven't been taking, well, they didn't know I was taking insulin, but they said like it's a byproduct of diabetes. Sometimes it happens and this, that, and the third. They're asking all these questions. So I was just like, I was pissed. I was really mad. And it was like going into a weekend and like nobody in my family knew what the heck was going on. Like I had some people that come visit me, but like my mom, for instance, and like she hates when I bring this up, but she came and she had went to like B-Dubs, BW3s, and she had brought these wings that had like barbecue sauce and all that. And at the time, I didn't even know that barbecue sauce could spike your sugar because
Mhm.
why read those labels? It's
Right. It's
sauce.
just
Sauce
sauce.
doesn't have carbs. What? So she was like, and they literally told me I could not eat like until they got the acid levels out of my blood. So she was sitting there and she was just eating and she was talking. I just remember glaring at her like, really?
You're mentally eating those wings.
Oh. And I was so hungry. Like I had not eaten in like 2 days. Like I was pissed. And she's like, you want some? And I was like, they told me I can't eat. She was like, oh, okay. And they were just smelling so good. So like those kind of things, like it just sticks with you. Like I don't like being restricted.
What did you call it? Did you call it B dubs?
B dubs.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was an experience. But after going through that and like coming out, I'm like, okay, like I really don't have a choice. Like now I really do have to like take this insulin stuff and figure it out. And at the time, like I wasn't on a pump. I was taking slow acting and fast acting. My endocrinologist was not a true partner as far as my health. Like she was taking me to take all kind of crazy amounts, was just throwing medications at me. And I didn't like that.
She was just trying to see how it bounced back, almost. Yeah.
And she was using me as a test dummy. That's what it felt like. And it was a lot. It was a lot to take in and a lot to process. So after that,
did it feel like now you were starting over in your diabetes journey?
For sure. It was a period of acceptance, and then also having to kind of relearn and get back into that frame. So like I said, I was heavily in denial. I was like, I don't have to deal with this. This is not mine to have. I'm not taking it. I'm not owning it. I don't want it. No, y'all can have this back. Like 0 out of 10, do not recommend, return to sender. Like that's what I was on. So just kind of getting to a point of accepting it, and also just realizing like it was something I had to do. Like it's not something that I could depend on anyone else for. It wasn't any of that. So within the 2 years that happened in 2014.
Right. You didn't mention something about you had briefly started talking about your husband, and that had something. It was like in between that DKA stage. It's like I hadn't even met my husband yet.
Yeah, well, I've known my husband since we were in high school. We dated in high school. We just, when I moved to Georgia for a little while to go to school in Atlanta, and we had broke up, and very amicable. Like he's always been one of my best friends. And then at the time, like we just kind of both ended up single at the same time again. So we were kind of exploring that, and like he had known me for a long time, so he knew like the sleeping my days away. He was like, listen, either you're like depressed or something health wise is going on, because this is not you. So he's really the one that encouraged me to go to the doctor. And then after that experience, like he didn't even really understand the severity of what I was going through. Like he went out, like that night I was admitted, like he went out to a party, like and I was pissed.
Was it a frat party?
No, it was like one of those like backyard barn parties, like huge. It might have even been around Halloween or something. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was just like, again, people don't understand. And he, even to this day, he was like, if I would have known it was that serious, like I definitely would have when I would have come. But we were young and living life in that. So,
and plus you were this independent person that did everything on your own.
Very much.
Since you were 8.
So. Mm-hmm. And like even the understanding of what the ICU was, like people don't know that's like truly intensive care unit. Like if you're there, it's some real shit going down, excuse me. So yeah, it was a big education moment for myself and also some of the people closest to me. So, and within a year's time, we were married and pregnant, which led to my pump journey. And things definitely took a more positive turn after that.
So within the year, you got married, pregnant, and technology.
Correct.
And
the pregnancy wasn't necessarily planned like that. It happened way faster than we thought it would. Like literally on our 2-month wedding anniversary, we're like, oh, we're having a baby. Oh God. So yeah.
So me and my wife, we've been married for 10 years on the 13th. And it makes me, like, often I tell her when I look back on some of our wedding videos and the photos and things, and I tell her, I remember everything leading up to the wedding, our nuptials and everything, but like the party part, I told her that's like a huge brain fog for me. I said, I think I
Right.
was like burnt the hell out during that time. Like
Yeah.
seriously. And I wasn't even checking my blood sugar. I probably checked it like right before the ceremony began and probably after the reception.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I do
Mm-hmm.
know over the years I've placed a lot of things in front of diabetes, but not today,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that the only way I can be there physically, emotionally, and help my family along their journey and the individuals in the community as a whole is if
Mm-hmm.
I'm whole. And my whole
Yeah,
starts with my well-being physically and mentally.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's like, I feel like after you've lived with it for a certain amount of time, it's just one of those things that kind of runs in the background. Like I said, I've went through periods of very like hyper vigilance and checking and doing that. And then like after I got on my Dexcom, it was like, okay, this is nice. I like not having to
Real
take this
nice.
every couple hours. Yeah, this is dope. But then like life takes over and the kids and work and all the other things, and I'm very much, as much as I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I care for folks in my family. So I have a lot of competing priorities, and it got to a point where I'm not even going to lie. Sometimes I still kind of operate in an autopilot where I have my alarm set. If I'm below a certain amount, if I'm above a certain amount, that thing is going to tell me, and then I'll pay attention to it. But outside of that, like I'm not super diligent about checking the things and the stuffs because it adds another layer of pressure, and it can be a lot to process on a day to day.
And we started off this conversation talking about you as being a Black queen. Um, how was that entirety of pregnancy for you? That was like another diagnosis. Like you've been starting over again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's like everything impacts your body to the point where it impacts your glucose levels. Like if it's hot outside, it's so many other things. But yeah, when I became pregnant, that's when I really started looking for support. And like I said, that's when I got into like the Facebook groups and things of that nature. But a lot of them were white women, who either this was their first child or, they've had multiple and they had different levels of medical support and medical teams and different things like that. And, I didn't have that initially, until I started getting a little bit more into my pregnancy, probably into like the fourth or fifth month is when like I actually started to see like some of the specialists, and they were doing a bunch of different things, but even that didn't feel supportive because they were trying to like guilt trip me and use fear tactics and things. And it was a lot. It was stressful, not so much because of my body and what my body was doing, but more so because of the supposed support that I had around
Hmm.
me. It was not supporting. It was very drastically not filling the needs that I needed it to fill.
More
So yeah, just
responding,
navigating that. Hmm.
more responding instead of initiating things. Like when we consider like medical professionals, instead of them initiating the process of like these are the things that are going to need to be done for you to be your
Hmm.
best physically, mentally, as you are carrying another life and living with a chronic health condition. Usually it's more like reactive, where they're like, oh, your A1C is this, we got to get it down, or your baby's going to be this and you're going to be that. That
Right.
inf- I'm telling you, there's so many prerequisites to living with
Yeah.
this chronic health condition that should be
Mhm.
implemented at different stages. You're a woman,
Mhm.
hormonal. Those things should be taught on day one.
Yeah, they should. But you're exactly spot on. Like their biggest priority was your A1C is a point above what it should be. It needs to get down. And it needs to get down yesterday. So whatever you need to do that, do it. Or else. And it was a lot of stress. It was a lot of stress. And also at that point, I think one of the biggest things that, regardless of whether you're a man or woman, but there are times when after being diagnosed with a chronic illness, like you feel like your body has betrayed you. And I did not trust my body to do the things and the stuffs because I'm like, you're broken. You haven't done the things and the stuffs to keep me where I need to be yet, or else I wouldn't have diabetes. So how can I trust my body to do what it should naturally do to bear this child, a healthy child? So that was intense, and trying to get to a point where, like I said, I really just trusted my body to do what it needed to do, and also myself to make the decisions that I needed to make sure that I had a healthy pregnancy in that. And don't get me wrong, my son was 10 pounds, 1 ounce. He was bigger, but they didn't even know that. The ultrasounds, they said he would be like 8 pounds. So he was delivered vaginally. Like I didn't have a C-section or anything like that. I was in labor for 29 hours. So, all of that, and even the support during the birth, that was traumatic. So, like, it's so much that goes into it. And then, like, diabetes is sometimes just a cherry on top. It's like, these are things that we're going to have to do regardless of whether diabetes was in the situation or not. But just the fact that it is, like, it's just additional weight, you know?
Yeah, I let everyone know along this journey, and I've mentioned it in the majority of these episodes, that people don't realize diabetes is not 24/7. Because when people say something is 24/7, they be like, I'm working 24/7. I'm doing this 24/7. No, diabetes is nonstop. Living with a chronic health condition is nonstop. Parenting is nonstop. Like all of these nonstop things that are in place in front of you, but you being the person that's living with it, we don't treat them as roadblocks. We just treat them as natural things that we have to get through to get to the next thing.
Right.
And like, I would never ever wish diabetes upon anyone, anyone who's even treated me bad, which I mean, I really don't consider people like that people have treated me bad throughout life, because they have their own issues they're dealing with or whatnot. So I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. But I do have a question for you.
Mhm.
Have you ever imagined your life without diabetes?
Oh, yeah. I think it's natural too. Like, you imagine your life, like, if you had been born during a certain era, if you were born in the 80s or the 70s, or, with this new generation, if you had different parents, if you, didn't have siblings, or you did, like, you kind of just imagine. And I definitely have thought about, and it's crazy you say that, because one of the things that kind of stuck with me over the years when I was in that T1D Mommies group is someone said that once you've lived with diabetes and your mind is accustomed to thinking of the things and doing the things, like it takes up space in your life. Um, what happens is, even if you were to get some level of transplant, or you magically don't have diabetes anymore, like there's going to be something that fills that space that you're going to spend the same amount of energy on, because you've carved out this space in your life for this piece of your life. So I always thought about it within that context. Like, man, if I didn't have to spend XYZ time thinking about counting carbs and insulin calculations and doing all of that, like, how would I spend that time? Like,
Right.
what would I give that energy to? That's kind of like how I think about it.
I feel you on that. I've often said this to people. As people living with chronic health condition, no time can be wasted. So like, if I'm in a situation with, even like if it's customer service or things of that nature, I'll always think to myself, okay, when I'm at that age and I'm on my deathbed and I'm just trying to communicate with my family, my loved ones, things of that nature, I've said this to people, who's going to give me that wasted time back? Because there's
Mm.
so much time, so much hours that have gone into contacting pharmacies, prescribers, insurance, the customer service, so many hours, days. It's probably been years that we've played. Like, I'm sure we've equally had a total of a full 365 days that we've dedicated to that over our lifetime. That one year, if we're on in our final days, if we were gifted another year, just think of all of the things that we could do that would be so attainable and how we can help our family. So I often think about like when people are like, hold on. I'm like, no, my time is not on hold. Let's move forward. I'm not ever going back.
Mm-hmm. So, I love that you said that, because I think the pandemic definitely put a different level of insight into different people's lives. And like my husband and I, we're in our 9th year of marriage now. So for the first time during COVID, like we were both home at the same time and kind of working through things at the same time. And that was the first time he ever witnessed like me being on the phone for hours, going back and forth between the insurance company, the medical supply company, UPS, and the fact that they say they delivered my Dexcom, but they didn't. And they literally rode right past the house. Just insane amounts of time and energy having to go back and forth with all of these entities. And then by the time you're done, you're like, I haven't even done anything productive with this time. Like it truly feels like it's wasted. And he witnessed that for the first time during COVID. He was like, it's like going on 4 hours now. And I said, yeah, and I still don't have what I need. Like, I'm still chasing people down. I'm still doing all these things. So, it just, I think, gave a different level of insight to why I show up the way I do and why I request support in different ways, because so much of my brain space has to go towards this illness that I can't not advocate for myself, right? I can't just say, well, maybe next time, like, no, these are things. And if I don't have these things, it severely impacts my quality of life.
And that what you just stated right there it's almost like a one pager that I share with people online and in person. I have like a business card and I let them know. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I'm doing in this space that I truly hope reaches everyone is I'm just trying to lessen the burden that is diabetes and chronic health conditions on everyone I come across. Because not only from education, but a lived experience of being able to lift myself up out of, those depths of solitude and do the things that I'm able to do today in this space, whether it's, I tell people, if you need supplies, anything, reach me because I can find them. The community that I'll have within this space, I've gotten supplies all the way to Uganda. I had a young lady in Atlanta last spring. She's going to be on a podcast in a couple weeks, where she was like crying about not having any insulin, that she was down to her last dose. I created a group of people in Atlanta for her. And that group has just grown. And now they communicate. I left the group so they can have it. And they were able to get the resources and guidance needed so that she can be her best. It's almost like that cup of sugar that you knock on your neighbor's door for. Yeah. In this space, we all have the medical supplies, the technology, that can help benefit another person, lessen the burden that is diabetes on them. We know resources to certain programs, patient assistance programs, good RX cards and things of that nature. There's no need in me holding that in. because it's no guarantee that everyone knows about these assistance programs.
Yeah. There's no benefit to the gatekeeping here.
No benefit
There's
at
literally no
all.
benefit.
At all. So, Brittany, before joining me on this journey that is the Chronically Will podcast, um, we never had a conversation before, have we?
No.
At all. And after our conversation over the last hour plus, I feel as though if I came to your community, I'll come with welcome arms. Like you'd be like, yeah, bring your family through. And I equally feel that same way. So if you're ever in this area, don't be afraid. You, your husband, your son, don't be afraid to knock on my door. All right. Because in this space, we are family. Because no one knows the ins and outs of the things that we go through and we grow through daily, but other persons that are actually living with this chronic health condition. I did want to wrap this up. I have a few questions that I jotted down, but I did want to know, aside from type 1 diabetes, do you or your family have a history of any other autoimmune diseases?
No, not I know of.
Not that you.
And that take that with what it is. Not that I know of. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means it's not what I know of. I know myself. I don't necessarily have hypothyroidism, but I do have a goiter, so like a growth. And at this point, they can't tell if it's cancerous or not. So actually, within the next month or so, 4 to 6 weeks, I'll be getting a procedure to at least get that part of my thyroid removed. So that's another part of the journey.
It is. It's everyone that I've spoken to, there's been something else that has come knocking on their door. Like even me personally, like people, when I tell them this, they're like, for real? Like I suffer from severe brain fog, severe. And that's why I jot down everything. I try to front load everything that I do. I have so many calendars or whatnot. I have chronic pains, have fibromyalgia, multiple arthritis conditions, hypothyroidism. But as we've been on this journey here, embarked on this journey, a big takeaway from this is that we are not defeated. We are always in the rings, on the field, against the ropes, on the court to win.
Yeah.
As long as we have that goal in mind, that we will win, meaning that our wins include our offspring's wins, our children's wins, our spouse's wins, our family wins. As long as we have all of that in mind, we will win. And as people living with chronic health conditions such as type 1 diabetes or any diabetes in general, we know that we must, like I said, front load a lot of the things that we do so that we can make sure that the measurable steps are taken so that we can succeed in this thing called life.
Absolutely.
My final question for you is, on the day that a cure is here, laugh, that's where the laugh begins. What will you do?
Responsive question. Is that cure available to me?
It will be available to you, even though we know at their 1922 in the event of insulin, when it first was given to children in the University of Toronto, none of them were children of color. And it took many years before a person of color was given insulin just to live a normal life. So yes, the cure is available to you. We see that it works. We know that it works. There's no going back from this cure because eradicates and eliminates what is diabetes? What do you do?
Figure out where I can get signed up. I mean, if it's, listen,
It's 100% legit, authenticated.
at the end of the day, diabetes is not just an ailment, an illness, something that we have to live with. It's expensive. And there's a certain level of quality of life. You asked if I think about the days when, if I didn't have this disease, I think about also how much money I would still have in my bank account if I did not have to pay for insulin pumps and insulin and things that are insanely inflated on price. So yeah, I would, for myself and for my family. I know one of the things that always kind of gets me in an emotional state is thinking about, like, there are times when I'm home alone with my son. My husband may be traveling and different things like that. And I've had to prep him on what a low snack looks like for mommy. And if mommy isn't responsive, like who you can call and how to unlock her phone and do things like that, or how to use the Alexa Echo to call your dad. Like, you have to prep the children for what to do if the situation happens. You hope it never does, but I'm just like, being able to lessen that burden, and he never has to worry about bringing mommy a juice or anything like that. Like that would be everything. Like, I can deal with it. I can handle it, but I don't want him to have to think about that.
It would be everything. And today, with modern technology and its advancements, hopefully that the cure will be here. But in between time, I hope that for your son, for my children, that we can continue managing this at our best without, without the needs of our young people even really knowing this. Like, because that too can place a burden on them. Like, okay, I heard mommy talking to this person about how much money she spends on staying alive, basically. That can be an adverse traumatic experience for them, as far as I'm thinking like, oh, mom and dad, they have to pay to stay alive. Also, when you think of things like, if you tell your child like, oh, you can't get that right now, will the child be like, is that because of the money that's being directed towards the medications to keep mom alive?
Yeah.
So yeah, many people don't see those burdens, and they are true burdens.
For sure. And my son is still in a place he thinks that the bank has an infinite amount of money and you just got to go there and get it.
Right.
So again, that innocence, just protecting that innocence. And then also, like, one of the things that gave me pause when I was even considering like bearing my own children was the fact that, like, at this point, it is genetic. It can be genetic. There is a chance that you can pass it on to your offspring. So there are times where, he doesn't like it, he hates it, but every so often, let mommy prick your finger or your toe or whatever, because I need to make sure if I'm seeing something, if I'm seeing he's going to the bathroom a little too often or he's drinking too often, like it's just something goes off and I'm like, let me just check. And then it's like the heart sinks and you're waiting in anticipation, like, Lord, please don't let this number be too high. Like, it's just a different level of stress to have to, live with and think about. So yeah, being able to eradicate that would truly be life-changing in the best way.
I remember during the beginning stages of the pandemic, where we're all in the house as a family, your children, or your son wasn't even in school yet. It's been that. What was he in pre-K? Maybe pre-K.
Yeah, pre-K.
Okay, yeah. My son was in kindergarten. Like, you're able to see your children in a way you've never seen them before, like truly And I remember looking at my youngest and was like, is he using the bathroom too much? Like, what's going on? He's drinking water nonstop. And I found myself starting to like prick his finger and stuff and check. And he's like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, okay. So that's when I was like, I'm going to do TrialNet. Are you familiar with TrialNet? TrialNet.org. So as early as 2 years old, you can do this for your child. If you have yourself type 1 diabetes like you do, and it will let you know if your child has any of the autoantibodies, any of those, I think it's 5 autoantibodies that will lead to type 1 diabetes. And if your child has 2, then it's almost like a guarantee that along their lifetime, they will have type 1 diabetes. And I took that as many parents are like, they fear doing that, knowing that their child will develop it. But I took it as a preventative measure because, like you said, I do not want my child to end up in DKA upon diagnosis, you know? So I was able to do those things and found out that my children do not carry any of the autoantibodies. And I felt like I should have the biggest party because it was like a huge relief because not only do I live with type 1 diabetes, but I have a first cousin. She lives with type 1 diabetes. And more recently, you're going to hear this on this podcast, fall 2022, I did a research on ancestry.com and came across the death certificate of my maternal great grandmother, Viola. Viola was orphaned. She was found in a rural area in Pennsylvania at six months old. That's what they're guessing her age was. So she never knew her family background, lineage, any of that stuff. So Viola, her death certificate reads, tended to from January 19th, 1954 to February 2nd, 1954, complain of intestinal or stomach issues. That's what it says. She had lost a ton of weight, frail, thin. Death certificate reads, death due to acidosis.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. And everyone's like, wow, great grandma Viola died of diabetes within 2 weeks. And she never received a diagnosis. She lived in a rural area. And this was 1954.
Wow.
Yeah. So if we can get rid of this condition globally for everyone, I'm all with it.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, I have not yet done it. I don't know that I'm going to. I think that's something that I would definitely need to kind of sit down and talk to my husband about, because there's, different levels of acceptance and also fear. And, once you have that information, like what you do with it matters as well. And I just don't know that we're at that place. And I also am very, very attentive to my son, and I'm watching and I'm listening, and that. So even just knowing the signs is very powerful in and of itself. So I think we'll continue doing what we're doing for now, but I think in this space I've just become very aware of how important it is to have hope, and that hope for the better tomorrow collectively on all the things, but also just knowing that it's possible, like seeing folks who are well into their 80s, 90 years old, and, they've had type 1 diabetes for so long. Like, those are the things that, don't get me wrong, I don't love to see it, but I love to see it because that gives me hope that, I can live a long life and I do have options. And, it gives you a different level of freedom emotionally, that I think we could all utilize. So even just, and I really appreciate you having me in this space today to be able to talk about these things as well, because you give me hope. You inspire me as well as all of the many folks of color that we have in our community. Just seeing each other thriving and not being held back, and being of support, because we are not robots. We are human. We do get tired. We do get worn out. But just having that community to lean on and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. If you're going to be anything, you're going to be fine. Like, I truly believe that even when we don't feel it, we don't look it, like, it's going to be okay. And if I didn't think that, then I'll probably be laid out depressed somewhere.
And on that note, Brittany, thank you for joining me on the Chronically Will Podcast, where we hold real conversations with community that need to be heard. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.